So in the next 15 minutes, and in order to set the scene for the rest of the day, I'm going to try and provide a brief overview of the latest trends in the field of ELT and development studies, and introduce you to also some new studies in this area, while getting in a plug for our new book coming out later in 2013. Many people who have contributed to it are here today. But I'm also aware of the fact that many people who are here today have a lot to say about these sort of issues, and so we're hoping to hear from you throughout the day as well. So I'm not going to be able, this is broad brush strokes, everybody. This is just trying to set the scene, really. I mean, you all know that English is really now viewed as the preeminent medium of international communication, and because of this, since the early 90s, there's been a significant increase in English language education and teacher education projects in development contexts around the globe. And as Howell said earlier, well, there's also growing research in this field. And at the beginning, the research was sort of celebratory and celebration of these projects and just reporting of this work, and these two maybe belong in that category. And over time, the work has got more critical and reflective. And today I'm both going to be talking about programs in which English-speaking countries have sort of helped help implement English as medium of instruction in development contexts, and also contexts where English is a foreign language, and we're talking about ELT programs. So I just wanted to, these are two different things really, and two different strands of research. So the two major categories of work I'm going to talk about today are the quantitative research in the area which sets out to measure the relationship between language skills and economic gain, and qualitative research, which draws on a variety of theoretical approaches. And within these, I also include the pseudo-Marxist rubbish that, as Michael said. But I actually think that that there's a lot in this work that we should be listening to and taking account of. So these are not two entirely distinct categories, and more researchers are trying to merge them and trying to devise nuanced ways of better understanding the connection between language use and development. And first, I just want to say that in 2010, another piece of research sponsored by the British Council, Howell put together a very useful publication, freely available online, looking historically at research that has tried to connect language use and economic gain. So for a nice overview, please look at that. Now, and here I'll point out as well as the importance of the work of François Crenton here, and his groundbreaking study that he published in 2001 about English as economic value. And this has really set the scene for people doing work in this area. He looked at the linguistic and the market situation in Switzerland, and again, I don't have a background in statistics and quantitative work, and I've struggled to understand this, and I'll give you my interpretation of the results, but please look at the original studies for details. He looked at the linguistic and market situations and concluded that salary premiums rise along with competence in English, even when education and experience are controlled for. But he also suggests that over time, English will lose its value as more and more people gain competence in the language. So moving this kind of work into the development context, Chakrabarti and Kapoor, in a study that, as far as I know, is only published online, looked at the situation in West Bengal, where English was removed from the primary curriculum in 1983. And so there were groups of people that had English in school and groups of people that didn't. And they found that those who were more likely to have training in English earned significantly high wages and gained better occupational outcomes than those who did not. And also in this category are the two Euromonitor studies that Howell mentioned, and again, as he said, they're problematic. In one aspect of their work, they look at English language competence and the level of foreign direct investment and make connections between how much of a population speaks English and how much investment from English-speaking countries. But as he also said, there's a lot of qualitative aspects to this work, and talking to government officials and heads of companies. Another study that tried to connect the levels of English to bilateral trade flow was published in 2010 by Koo and Sussman. And they found that in a survey of 100 countries in which English is not a first language, the acquisition of English language skills could be seen as enabling the promotion of foreign trade. And they did this by constructing a database based on mean national scores in the TOEFL test over the last 30 years. And controlling for other factors that influence trade, they argue that English proficiency has a strong and statistically significant effect on bilateral trade flows. So this is some of the straightforward statistical analysis looking at connections. Now, other studies have shown a more complex picture, and they argue that although there may be some causal relationship between English language ability and economic development, it needs to be qualified by the pre-existing social environment. So, for example, Levison in 2004, found that the economic advantage of being able to speak English in South Africa increased as the country opened up to the international economy after apartheid. But he also found that there was more of an advantage for white than for black South Africans. And so his work demonstrates that English language ability is not necessarily of equal value for different ethnic groups. Kobayashi in Japan also found a relationship between English and economic gain, but she found that this relationship only exists within the pre-existing hierarchical social structure. So, for example, women have less access to opportunities no matter what their level of English is. So, again, showing gender as a significant factor here. And where are they? Oh, yes. And this study, Azam, Chin, and Prakesh, used the Indian Human Development Survey of 2005 to quantify the effects of English speaking on wages. They found that fluency in English increased the hourly wages of men by 34% and thus had the same economic impact as completing secondary school. And simply being able to speak a little English increased male hourly wages by 13%. They found, however, that returns to English were lower for women, particularly those in rural areas, and were also significantly lower for members of India's scheduled class, or the Dalits or untouchables. So they conclude that upward mobility doesn't come automatically with English skills in India. Some obstacles, which likely include long-rooted discrimination against low class, impede low-class group members even when they have skill that is valued by the modern labor market. So whatever value there is for English, there's a complex picture here, and there's a lot of other social factors that play a role here. And finally, I'll just talk about a recent study that's coming out in our book by Here François Grin has teamed up with Jean-Louis Arcon, who is a professor of international economics at the University of Geneva and a specialist in development economics. So they're trying to bring together this language, policy expertise, and development expertise, and which, you know, they and others argues this is what we need more of, and we often don't speak each other's languages very well. And to be honest, this article is difficult for people with humanities backgrounds, but they have used econometric procedures to establish empirically verifiable links between English language and development. And they counter studies like the Euromonitor studies and the Kuhn-Sussman study that I mentioned earlier. And they find that in post-colonial contexts in sub-Saharan Africa and Asia, widespread competence in English is not necessarily associated with a higher level of economic development, which they, as Hal said, measured by GDP. But instead, they find that societal multilingualism, or use of local languages, increases income per capita in these contexts. And this makes me wonder, you know, as Howell was saying earlier, these market situations. This is that multilingualism is valuable here to be successful in those fields. And very importantly, their novel use of statistical approaches, they suggest that previous research on the impact of language and development needs to be reviewed and perhaps has been seriously misinterpreted for years. So they suggest that we need to go back and look at all of these other studies and think about the way they were done and the kind of results that they've come up with. So we've got a very complex picture here that depends. There's very limited hard evidence. Much of it is based on perceptions, as Howell said. Even the hard evidence we have might need to be questioned, and there's a suggestion that we need new approaches to look at this complex relationship between language use and development. On to the qualitative research. That and again here, people are attempting to use various approaches from across the fields of sociolinguistics, development studies, economics, to better understand this relationship and how, as well, it arose historically. And and I just will mention a few. These books as well. I mean, I don't work for Multilingual Matters, but it just so happens that they publish a lot of the books that I read, and they do have a stall here and some order forms. I think you with a 15% discount or something like that. But they have published a lot of interesting work in the field of language and development. The 2007 book by Naz Rasool, who's here and will speak to us this afternoon, and she really looks at the way that language education policies in Africa and the Indian subcontinent during the 19th century have left an enduring challenge for educationalists and policymakers and have contributed to the underdevelopment of these nations and their local languages. So giving language a role in the underdevelopment of these countries. And similar work was done by Paulin Gité about the use of language in Africa. And the third one is a really interesting collection that really looks at language and poverty and the role that the languages people speak or don't speak plays in their economic success. And I'll move into, and as well, I mean, I think Howell's book belongs in this category, and again, that's also in the corner over there for free. And my own work, I hope, is working in this tradition. We've been looking more and more at these discourses that adhere to English, and the importance of these as came up after Howe's session. It's not just the reality of what comes with English language learning, it's the whole perceptions about English and what people believe about them, that is, and how these ideologies adhere to English, and how can we mediate against them as well, as Pauline asked earlier. So, as Astrid mentioned in the morning, I've been able to work on now two, I'm just starting the second one, research projects that have been usefully funded by the British Council, where we have been looking about at attitudes to English in rural Bangladesh. In the first study, we found that there was overwhelming agreement in rural people working in agricultural jobs and fishermen and things, people saying, well, yes, we all need English. And whether it was to read packaging on pesticides or to read prescriptions on medication, to not get cheated at the market, those sort of things, there were very strong perceptions that English would help these people in their daily lives, but they also strongly believed that if their children spoke English, their lives and opportunities would be different than theirs. And so within this body of qualitative research are these studies that use Marxist or post-colonial theory to question the very assumptions that ELT programs in development are based on. And in light of the continued failure of many educational initiatives in development contexts, despite significant investment, they trace the lack of economic development in some contexts to the classroom. And I mean, we've heard from Robert Phillipson since 1992, and his critique is still going on. Recently, earlier in 2012, he wrote an article in the Guardian Weekly where he said that TESOL or ELT is part of the problem of underdevelopment rather than the solution, and that there's increasing evidence that what's on offer may in fact cause educational failure. And I should note that John Nagg, who we'll be hearing from this afternoon, did write a response to this, highlighting how the British Council is now actively promoting multilingualism. But as Phillipson rightly notes, research evidence on English medium education is unambiguous, and applied linguists, several of whom are in this room, have repeatedly and for many years advised against the choice of English as the language of instruction due to the large body of evidence pointing to linguistic issues as a major source of continued educational failure. And I believe that's what Gibson's going to talk a lot about this after me. But some of the more recent research in this field uses evidence from the classroom to show links between language use and development. For example, Eddie Williams, who I believe is here, presents research conducted in Malawi, Zambia, and Rwanda in schools, and by looking at reading levels and exam results, demonstrates that students cannot receive quality education, and as they're not able to adequately read their textbooks for either English or other curriculum subjects. And he also argues that there's little evidence that English language education policies have the intended effect of enhancing national unification and development, which is often, the impetus behind policy changes. And also, Pauline Ray Dickens looks at, through linguistic analysis, looks at exam results of school children and shows how the choice of to use English as medium of instruction impacts students' ability to be taught and examined. And she argues that, with her colleagues, that assessment has a major impact on the social and economic lives of individuals in these contexts. I believe I'm pretty much out of time. Other people will be hearing from Helen Pinnock this afternoon about research she's been involved in, but she basically shows that language issues are perhaps one of the major reasons we're not going to meet some Millennium Development Goals in particular contexts. There's a growing body of critique of ELT projects in development contexts, talking about waste of resources. David Noonan looks at 13 countries, I believe, and shows how various projects have been ineffective. Martin Waddell, who we'll also hear from today, criticizes projects for failing to plan and implement a coherent program. Also, two people who couldn't be here today, but who have contributed vodcasts that we circulated earlier. They'll be online after the conference, and they'll be during the break running on that video wall if you haven't had a chance to watch them yet. Roz Appleby has claimed that ELT projects in effect support Western hegemony through the promotion of cultural ideals such as bias towards monolingualism and through the importation of project models that aren't necessarily appropriate for their context. She also criticizes the way that project failures are often dressed up as successes in order to be successful in the next round of funding, and argues that as a result, we don't and can't learn from our mistakes. And I'd like to maybe take that point forward in some discussion later in the day. Jackie Whiddon, her book is excellent. She talks about how Australian funded projects that are intended to enhance the quality of English language teaching in Laos, and there's another one in Japan, and she shows how ELT plays an important role in the market of universities, so how important it is for their financial success, but questions the benefits of such projects to local participants. So we've got this growing body of research. We've got some suggestions of ways to move forward, ways to respond to this. Some of these I've summed up here. We need to question the assumptions that ELT has a direct impact on development and recognize the complexity of this relationship. We need to take into account that popular demand for English is fueled by myths, dreams, assumptions that may or may not have to do with realities or measurable impact. We need to accept that every context is unique and be prepared to make program and materials appropriate to these contexts. And we need to produce materials in local languages and build on local language literacies. So we have some ways forward that have been suggested. I still have some questions, and I hope that some of them will be answered today, and I hope that some of you have ideas, and surely you all have other questions as well. But so without ignoring the strong demand for English, because we have to listen to people, how can we recognize the importance of local languages in delivering quality education that will support personal and national development? How can we communicate messages, that's what Pauline asked this morning, I think, to parents, teachers, policymakers about the importance of mother tongue education? How do we enable better dialogue with development agencies, ensure that the importance of language in education initiatives is recognized?